this deal, Joe Biden says, will eventually see a permanent end to the war. Let's welcome on Gregg Carlstrom, who's Middle East reporter for The Economist, and just take a little sense check on what we've heard this evening. Good evening, Greg. Thanks for being with us.
Hi, good evening. It's happening. It's finally happening. After a year of false starts, there is this deal that is meant to start on Sunday. I think there are a lot of questions about how you get from the first phase of this agreement to the second phase, how you get from this initial 6-week truce that sees a limited hostage release and a partial Israeli withdrawal, how you get from that to a permanent ceasefire, a total Israeli withdrawal. That still has to be negotiated. I think that's going to be difficult. So there's a lot of enthusiasm amongst Palestinians in Gaza, amongst other people right now, that the war, at least temporarily, is coming to an end. But I think getting it to a permanent end is still going to be a tall order.
Let's just spell out what we know so far, though, for any listeners just joining us, Greg. Let's talk about this initial 6-week, 42 days, phase one. It's a 3-phase deal. And as you've just said, some of the later stages are still pretty fluid. But what do we know about the first stage?
The first stage, a few major things that are meant to happen. Hamas will release 33 hostages. That's 1/3 of the 99 hostages that it's still holding. It's not clear if they're alive or dead. It's not clear if they're releasing 33 living hostages or if some of them are going to be dead bodies that they hand over. But these 33 are meant to be women, children, the elderly, groups like that are going to be released. In exchange for that, for each hostage, Israel will release 30 Palestinian prisoners. So about 1,000 prisoners in total will be set free. And this will happen in stages. There'll be 3 hostages released on the first day, then 4 on the 7th day, and it will happen in dribs and drabs over this 6-week period. And then along with that, Israel is meant to begin withdrawing its troops from Gaza. Again, not completely. They're going to pull out to a buffer zone along the edges of Gaza, but not totally withdraw from the territory, and then more humanitarian aid is meant to flow in.
Okay, all right. Let's just talk about phase two, because I think this is interesting. Joe Biden's basically said that phase two will include more negotiations. So he's talked about, and this is really significant here, negotiations in phase two, setting out the necessary arrangements for what would be the permanent end to the war. That sounds impressive, and I just wonder how realistic you think that is, Greg.
I think it's not very realistic, to be honest. I think listening to what Biden said just now, one thing that he said that wasn't in the text of the ceasefire, or that I didn't see in the text of the ceasefire, was that these negotiations about phase two, they're meant to begin on the 16th day of the ceasefire. As long as those negotiations are still going on, the first phase will continue. So they're almost anticipating that this effort is not going to go well, or it's going to take a long time. I think the fundamental question, which has been an issue in these talks for a year now, is will Hamas have some role in governing Gaza in the future? Obviously, it wants to remain in power in some way. Obviously, Israel doesn't want it to remain in power. There's been talk about whether the Palestinian Authority might be able to come back and exercise some role in Gaza, but the Israeli government hasn't been willing to talk about that. It's really unclear who is going to control this territory, and I think that is going to be the crux of the issue when they get to negotiating phase
And
two.
that's surely the real sticking point here, because we're talking about the lasting legacy. We are talking about trying to ensure that there is nothing at all for Israel to gather back for if they're going to be on the fringes while phase one takes place. Every effort needs to be made for them to eventually withdraw completely. And presumably, Greg, there are discussions going on behind the scenes about who will control the territory, and the Palestinian Authority will be involved in those. I mean, what sort of would be a realistic solution to that?
There are those discussions, but the problem is there's no agreement on anything realistic. The Biden administration does want the Palestinian Authority to come into Gaza, but there are questions there, honestly, about whether the PA has the capacity to do that. It's barely able to control some of the areas in the occupied West Bank that it's meant to control. So the idea that it's going to go back to Gaza and be able to exert its writ in this, ruined hellscape that is Gaza, it's hard to imagine they'll be able to do that. There have been other people in the Israeli government and elsewhere who think that Arab states might be persuaded to step in, that maybe Gulf states or maybe Egypt will play a role in trying to govern Gaza, but that's not a job they want. They see that as a poison chalice. It's going to be very difficult. It's going to put them in a position where they might have to fight with Palestinians, where their troops might have to fight with Palestinians. That's not a role any Arab state wants to be in. So there are lots of ideas floating around, but no one, I think, over the past year has really been able to put forth a realistic, workable plan for who is going to govern Gaza.
Phase 3, by the way, Joe Biden says for the final remains of hostages, an awful thing to have to say there, will return to their families and a reconstruction plan for Gaza will begin. What is the next step in the immediate? The ceasefire deal begins on Sunday, but I'm reading in various places that it still has to be ratified by the Israeli government.
It does, and it's expected to pass. I think Prime Minister Netanyahu will have enough votes in the cabinet, certainly in the parliament. There will be a few far-right lawmakers who will vote against it. They had threatened for much of the past year that if there was a ceasefire, if the war ended, that they would bring down the government. They would leave the coalition and force early elections and protest. I don't think that's going to happen because these far-right lawmakers, they can read the polls, and the polls show that if they force an early election now, they are likely to do badly in that election. So they will protest, they will vote against it, but I don't think they're going to collapse the government over the ceasefire. And so it's likely that the Israeli government will vote in favor. Hamas has already given its approval. And so at that point, all that is left is for them to start implementing the deal on Sunday.
Look, Greg, thank you so much for taking us across that. Gregg Carlstrom is Middle East reporter for The Economist. And as he said right at the start, it is happening. It's finally happening. It certainly is. Let's get some reaction now from an Israeli government spokesperson, David Mencer, who joins us now on the evening edition. It's Times Radio with you all evening, of course. David Mencer, a warm welcome to you. This deal still has to be ratified by the Israeli cabinet tomorrow. Just give me your prediction of what will happen.
So if this agreement is actually agreed by Hamas, and that is still not clear yet, to be frank, because there's been a strong insistence by our Prime Minister, because Hamas have folded on at the last minute to try and change some of the details of IDF forces being on the border with Egypt, crucial to stop weapons smuggling, and also several other items within the framework have yet to be finalized. But we hope, as you say, that the details will be finalized tonight. So this agreement to release our hostages, I think it demonstrates Israel's strength, it's Israel's humanity, and Israel's unwavering commitment to get its citizens home. And yes, we do indeed expect Israel's government to ratify the agreement, because it comes at a time when Hamas is at its weakest. And Israel has achieved a significant strategic victory against those who threatened our nation. Go ahead.
Okay, look, you say there the deal, as you understand it, has not been agreed by Hamas. Why have we just heard from Joe Biden, the US president, indicating that it is an agreed deal?
So, Kate, I'm a spokesman for the Israeli government, and I'll give you the Israeli government's point of view. We hope from here in Israel that the details are finalized tonight, but there have been some changes at the very last minute. Let's not forget, Kate, this is the Middle East, and deals are not the most frantic time of deal making is right until the very last moment. We hope this is finalized tonight, but I don't have confirmation yet that it is finished.
Okay, so Joe Biden calling this a deal, saying that we've achieved a ceasefire deal. That we need to take with a pinch of salt almost, because it is not past the final stage. Of course, it has to go up in front of the Israeli cabinet tomorrow. But first and foremost, you say from your perspective, never mind what Joe Biden says, from your perspective, you are still not clear whether the deal has been agreed by Hamas.
There are still some final details which need to be worked out tonight. Our government is hopeful that those deals, that those individual items of this agreement will be finalized tonight.
Okay. The issue, I know you talk about the Philadelphia corridor, that area of land between the Gaza Strip and Egypt, and really the positioning of Israeli troops in that particular area. And we'd understood that there was some dispute over maps. So there were maps within the ceasefire agreement, and there was some dispute or some corrections needed in terms of what was on those maps. Is that what you understand as well? That is the biting point, to be absolutely clear. To what point do Israeli troops withdraw, and actually how long do they then remain in that strip of land, remain on the border between Egypt and Gaza?
I don't want to do any negotiating on Times Radio, but yes, you're right. The Philadelphia crossing is absolutely key for Israel, because that was the main smuggling route of Hamas to get its deadly armory, its missiles, its rockets, its ammunition, its grenades, its rocket-propelled launchers. That was its main route to get them into Gaza. Gaza then became a terrorist base from which to attack us. Kate, we don't want to be back here in 2 years' time. It's very, very important. We feel now that our strategic dominance, the fact that Hamas has been decimated, their leadership has been eliminated, their rocket arsenals has been destroyed, their tunnel networks have been greatly compromised, their operational abilities shattered. They're no longer the force they once were. Iran, we know, is the driving force behind Hamas, and they too, together with others, have been dealt severe blows. So all of us here in Israel are desperate to get our people home. It is a key part of every single Israeli's waking lives right now. We see the pain amongst their families' eyes. There's 98 of our people. We're desperate to get them home. So we hope that this deal is finalized tonight with the final details, but this agreement is important to us to get our people home.
Do you have a preference? Who in your mind should control Gaza after the withdrawal of Israeli troops? This is a really important one to sort out, to try and get some minds around.
Yes, indeed. Look, Hamas has been greatly depleted. As we said, we've lost most of their power, and their security forces have been defeated. So in this transition phase, the military strategy, which has been passed on by our politicians, I mean, there's a limited amount I can share with you on air, because otherwise it'll be dead on arrival. But and certainly the US is coming up with a plan. But our plan has three principles. The first one is the complete removal of Hamas. We said that that was one of our war aims. The second one is the demilitarization of Gaza, very key. And the third one is the de-radicalization of Gaza's people. Hamas is not going to rule Gaza in the future. It's simply not going to happen. In the immediate future, Israel will retain security control. We don't want to be in Gaza for a moment's longer than we have to be, but Gazans interested in a better Gaza, not killing Israelis, but for a better future for their own people, they will be invited forward, as well as moderate Arab nations, to make it happen. You know, the Palestinian Authority, as you talk about, they are, to be frank, problematic. Palestinian society needs to be de-radicalized. You know, who are the heroes, for instance, for a Palestinian 15-year-old? They're suicide bombers. They're the murderers of Jews. So we will link the reconstruction to de-radicalization. And an example of de-radicalization is you can see in Saudi Arabia, where they rebuilt, destroyed, and challenged mosques and decided who preaches in those mosques and what they preach, just like the Emiratis did in the UAE as well.
Right.
So that de-radicalization is absolutely key.
Okay, all right, I hear you. Thank you very much for joining us. David Mencer, Israeli government spokesperson.